Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Gavinsky's Tutorials. Today I'm looking at Beatcutter by Igor Vasiliev, and whether this video is going to turn into a full-on tutorial or just a kind of little sketch really depends how it goes. This is quite a complex app, it is quite mystifying. I've been on the beta for about a week. I've gone through so many different phases with how I feel about this app. Absolutely loving it at times, hating it at other times, being extremely frustrated by the manual, which I found very hard work to get through, having some frustrations with the interface, but then at other times playing around with it and coming up with something where I was like, wow, this is brilliant. So I've never had such a kind of love-hate relationship with an app, or I've had so many moments where I felt, I finally understand it now. And then an hour later I was like, tearing my hair out going, no, I don't. There's still some things I'm missing. At the moment, I feel like I understand it kind of 90-95%. So let's see how this goes today, everyone. If it's not up to the standards of a normal Gavinsky's tutorial, do please forgive me. I'm genuinely trying my best with this one. I was very close to not making a video on this because I felt there are a lot of challenges with making this video up to the standard of my usual videos, but I know for a fact that if I don't make this video, the absolute majority of people who buy this app, I mean seriously 90%, are honestly not going to have a clue how to use it even if they read the manual, because I know the average iOS user is not a big manual reader, and reading through this manual once is also not going to cut it for most people. You're going to have to seriously study it. So I just decided, okay, bugger it, even though I know that this tutorial is not going to be up to my normal standards, I'm going to make it anyway. So I hope you see I'm kind of like taking one for the community here. I'm making myself a bit uncomfortable by doing this, but I know it will be valuable. So please, everyone, you find this useful, even if it's not 100% as clear as what I normally do, which I try to be extremely clear in my videos normally. Well, please do give it a thumbs up. There's a hell of a lot of work has gone into this. A lot of work trying to understand this app. Now, I've got 5 copies of any app by Igor Vasiliev to give away. So he's done some really cool stuff, but his stuff is always very unique and a little bit impenetrable. I'll talk later about that in the video. Is that because he's a genius and we can understand? Is it because his interfaces are not that good? Let's see. We'll discuss that later. So you can win 5 copies of any Igor Vasiliev app. So go and take a look at the App Store. If you don't know if you just look for Beatcutter, for example, because I don't think in the App Store he uses the name Igor Vasiliev. I think it's listed under something else. iMusicAlbum, maybe. Anyway, if you search for Beatcutter, then you'll find the developer. Then you can see all the different apps that he's got available. And this giveaway is only available to subscribers to the channel. If you're not a subscriber, you can subscribe now. All the details of what you've got to do are, as usual, in the pinned comment at the top of the YouTube comment section. Please do read the comment carefully. All right, everyone. So first, let's have a little listen to what Beatcutter can sound like. Basically, what it is you feed signals into it either live, as I'm doing here, with instances loaded in the FX units here, and the audio input coming from different apps up here, or you can also load files into it, and then basically what it will do is mangle the shit out of them beyond absolutely any recognition. It doesn't have to be like that. It can be more subtle as well, but in general, it's quite a mangly app. It's pretty chaotic, and that's one of the things that makes it quite hard to understand. One of the biggest problems with trying to make a video on this app and trying to understand this app is that it records input, and then it processes that input and it outputs that input, but there's a lot of variety possible in the way that it will do that, and randomization is a huge part of how this app works. It's a huge part of making the app usable, but it's also a very big part of why it's extremely difficult to go through in a very systematic way. It's very difficult for me to show you simple cause and effect. When I do this, I press this slider, then you hear this. It's hard to do that because there are often delays because of the nature of the app itself. So in today's video, there's going to be more exposition than normal, and I won't show you everything. As you know, when I do videos, I normally like to say, okay, this is what this does, and then I show you, and then I'll let you hear it. In this app, I'm not going to do that so much. You're probably going to have to watch this video a couple of times to get it. You're probably going to have to watch it with another device in front of you that you've got Beatcutter on and actually trying things out and pausing and trying to go through it. But I do guarantee you that you're going to enjoy that a hell of a lot more than going through the manual, because this manual is seriously not enjoyable to work through. It is really, really dense. It is quite hard to understand, and there are a few things in it that I think are not explained sufficiently clearly. I mean, I'll cut to the chase and I'll say the fact that this app is hard to understand, it's partly because it is a complex idea and it's a complex execution, but it's also partly, in my opinion, because of flaws in the way that the interface is done that makes it not very user-friendly. I'll maybe mention a little bit more about those things. Nevertheless, Igor is a really unique developer. I mean, I love Classic FX, for example, and in fact, I love Fieldscaper as well, even though Fieldscaper, for example, I don't really understand how to use it well, but I love what it can do. This app also, you don't really need to understand it that deeply. You can just press random and come up with some interesting results, but obviously it's going to be more interesting and more useful if you can actually kind of understand a bit what's going on. So I have a lot of respect for Igor. I think he's a very interesting and unique developer, but I don't particularly like his interfaces, and I think that they could be designed in ways that would make them much easier to use. There's no need for these to be as complicated as they are. It's not because we're too stupid, it's because these interfaces are a little bit too confusing and could be done in a better way. That's my honest opinion, and I'm putting it out there right now. Okay. So let's just have a little listen to what it can sound like. Now I'm bringing in frames on top of this. Frames is also being processed by it. This ripple maker is also being processed, and I'm also putting through the raw signal now. But now I'm muting that raw signal, muting frames. Now I'm muting drum computer. And so what we're hearing coming through now is we're hearing the signal from this instance of ripple maker, this instance of ripple maker, this drum computer, and this frames. We're hearing them, but we're not hearing any of the original signal. We're all just hearing it processed by Beatcutter. So then what you can do is, I mean, you can just let it do that, or you can bring in your percussion by unmuting this channel, and then you've got something that is kind of a lot more coherent. So that's the way that a lot of people are going to want to use it. And then, like I say, you can also decide, depending on the other signals that you're using, whether you also want to bring them in or not. Like, I think this is really nice to have this frames running in the background. It also just brings a little bit more consistency to it. Because if you don't have some stuff that's going on and giving it a bit of a foundation, it can be just really quite chaotic. Like, that's pretty interesting to me. I think that's very cool. Now let's see what happens when I do one of the randomizations that we can do. So I'm going to press this randomize button and let's see what it comes up with. Go. pretty cool. Now we don't have to randomize. We can go through and adjust things manually. And in fact, there are no less than 44 pages of sliders and shit like that in this app. This is absolutely insane. It's a bit too complex, to be honest. Like this input page, for example. This is just for bus 1. This is for 2, 3, 4, and so on. Complicated. Let's try another randomization. Let me take... Let me mute all the sources and let you just hear what Beatcutter's coming up with for the randomizations. I'm going to press random again. I have instant pressed here, so we're going to hear the random changes immediately. If instant is not pressed, they might take some time to come through. It's really crazy and glitchy, huh? So again, like I say, I like to have something else going on, a bit of a bass. Much more interesting to use it like that to me. And definitely nice to have the drums going. Stick on a bit of slow machine from time to time. Really fun app, which I reviewed about a month or 2 ago. 3 maybe? I'm also enjoying Bliss Motion a lot. Now if I put this on here, it will start coming in, but it might take a while. Now I'm bringing in this Ripple Maker, or Ripple Maker original signal, which is also pretty cool on top. Let's try another randomization. Okay. Wow. Madness, madness. Okay, let me try and give you a bit of a walkthrough and explain what the hell is going on here. Okay, let me explain a few things. Okay, it's very important to know how to set this up. Actually, I'll just bring that down. If you're using this in a host like AUM, for example, this is how the setup works. The app can process 8 files at a time, or it can process 4 channels live, like I'm doing here. Okay, now what I do is, let's say, just load up your 4 synths, or you could use AUM file player or whatever, anything. Load up your sound sources up here, okay? And if you don't know how to use AUM, by the way, watch my walkthrough video on AUM called Almost Everything You Need to Know About AUM. So there's too much to explain about this app without teaching people about AUM in this video as well. And then what we'll do is we'll load Beatcutter as an FX. So what we do is, in the first instance here, for example, load Beatcutter, and we will load that. Look, just imagine there's nothing here. Imagine that I'm putting the first instance of Beatcutter. I'll just go into audio unit extensions and I'll choose Beatcutter. I'll just click on this. I'm not going to do it because I've done it already. So that's what this instance is. Then in the second channel, I do not do that. I don't do what I did in the first channel. Instead, what I do, just pretend this is not there, okay? I click. I do not choose audio unit extension. No, no, no. Instead, I choose multi-bus audio unit instances and I choose Beatcutter here. So I click on this. I'm not going to do it because I've done it already. And you know that this has been done correctly because there will be a number here. If it's the second one that if I do this after I open that first one, it will automatically get this number too. And then I will just repeat the same process. So in this channel, I will do the same thing that I did over here. I won't open it as an audio unit. I'll open it as the multi-bus instance, right? I'll do that again. So here. So I go through and do that for all my 4 channels. Now you don't need to use 4 channels, but I'm doing it with 4 channels. So that's the first important thing about how to set it up. Now, then there is another extremely important thing. Let's go to this third tab called Input. Now, it doesn't matter, by the way, which of these we do things in, okay? All of these are the same. These are multi-input, okay? It's not multi-output, it's multi-input. But if I make a change on any one of these, the settings are going to change on all of these. These are all linked. So it doesn't matter which one I open. So on any one of these, I go in, I click on this third tab, this Input tab, and there are a lot of different ways we can do this, but let's look at the way I've done it. So very important to pay attention. At the bottom of the screen, we have these numbers. These are what Igor calls buses. So let's take bus 1, that here on the left, I have selected C1. What does that mean? It means that in this app, all the things that are called bus 1 in the app are going to be connected to the channel 1 input, which in this case is this instance of RippleMaker, right? Okay, so I set bus 1 to channel 1. This one here, 2, I'm going to set it to channel 2. Now, I could set these up any way I want, it doesn't matter, but this is the way that I'm doing it. I could have, for example, 1 here. I could choose any of these. I could have bus 1 as channel 4 input, or I could have it as a file, right? I can load files. To do that, all I have to do is click here, and it's going to play the file, but there's no file loaded here. If I wanted to load a file, I would do that. I would just click on File, and I could click any of these. I could load that file, and then it would process that file. If I didn't already import the file, I need to import it using the Import button. This does not have drag and drop file player support, unfortunately, but it will open up. If I do import here, it'll open up and it'll let me import files from the file system. But I would like to see drag and drop added. Okay, let me see how the hell I get out of here. Cancel. Okay, so let's just come back into the Input tab. So again, I'm going for 1. I want to choose channel 1 as my input. 2, I'm choosing channel 2. 3, channel 3. 4, channel 4. And then what I have decided to do, because there are 8 buses, and it's interesting to use all 8, because then what we can do is we can, even though we're only putting in 4 signals, we can do 2 different processings on each signal, or again, you can set it up any way that you want, but that's the way I've done it. So what I've done here is 5, again, I've set to channel 1, and 6, I'm putting channel 2, 7, channel 3, 8, channel 4. But again, you could set this up any way that you like, right? This is a bit confusing. Play around with it a little bit, it'll eventually become clear. I mean, hopefully it is clear to you already, but if not, what can I say? Watch the video again. It's a deep app, it's a bit confusing, this app. All right, so this is this Input tab, so that's very, very important to go in and set up the input tab. Now let's look at what other tabs we've got here. Let's just look at this very briefly. So first we've got the main tab. Now this is really cool looking, but it's a bit confusing really what it is. I'll let you read about this in the manual, but roughly what's going on here is this is called a matrix, and we can record samples into the matrix, and we can use different triggers to trigger what will be recorded and where it will be recorded and so on. So things will get recorded in, and then they will be sequenced by the sequencer, and then they will be output and they will be processed and so on. So this bus mode, this will change the way the matrix behaves. This is very confusing. This was really badly explained in the manual, and in fact I only finally today understood this properly based on a video that Igor sent to me. I wish he had sent me that video a week ago. It would have made things a lot clearer to me, because this is seriously not explained well in the manual. Maybe by the time you're reading the manual it'll be better, but in the version of the manual that I got a week ago, this seriously was not well enough explained, and it caused me, and I would imagine other beta testers, a hell of a lot of confusion. So we have here, we can see, okay, what is highlighted, right? It's blue inputs. What we're seeing here is these different inputs, which ones are inputting at any given time. We can see at the moment, for example, just 2 and 6 are inputting, and this is changing. So here we're seeing the inputs. Now we can change this. For example, here, this is bus mode 3. That just means that it will do those inputs in this position relative to the matrix. If I press 4, you'll see they'll move over here. If I press 5, they'll move over here. And so on and so on. Let me just put it back to 3. Then I can click on trigger, and here we will see how the triggers work. So the triggers are things that will basically decide whether or not input gets recorded. That's the simplest way to explain it. Control, this will do a few different things related to the pitch and things like that that we'll look at later. Output, this will control what is happening with the outputs. Again, we'll look at that later. And sequence, that will control the sequencer. So again, it's kind of related to output. So we can, if with all 5 of these being, we can move them in relation to the matrix using these different things, and we'll see these positions changing. And what that means is that at any time, basically, we can have 40 different configurations going on. Do you really need to know this? I don't know. Maybe not, because a lot of the time what you're going to do is just press the random button. But anyway, that is basically what this thing is showing. Then here it's showing inputs, and if it's red, it just means it's clipping a little bit. It doesn't matter if it's clipping as long as it's not clipping in the main host, right? Because a lot of apps run very hot, like things like Drum Computer, for example. When you open up any instance of Drum Computer in AUM at just the default level, it's almost always going to be coming a bit red here. So you can go in and turn the levels down if you want, but as long as this is not clipping, it's not really going to matter. I have, by the way, put Barricade on this, so hopefully that will stop any clipping going on the main output. So that is the main screen. So, you know, honestly, I really don't like this interface. It's not intuitive. It's not very obvious at all, for example, initially, that these and these are related. And you can read about that in the manual, but it's just explained in quite a cryptic way. It really took me some time to wrap my head around this. I think Igor is an extremely creative developer. I I said to Igor, listen, I give you an A plus for creativity. In terms of interface design, no, not A plus to me. Overly confusing interfaces that could be designed a lot better. Igor, I love your work, but I would really, really like to see you rethinking the way you do your interfaces to make them more enjoyable to use and much more intuitive. Okay, so then we come to this template thing here. This is deep, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of the time when you're using this, all you're going to do is just press random, boom, go, and you're going to get randomizations. Let's hear, for example, what some of these randomizations can be like. So let me put this up. Okay, so now we're not hearing any raw signal, okay, we're just getting the app itself. Now, there are some things explained in the manual about which of these you don't want to touch. There's some things that should be left as 0. One of them is this thing, trigger sources. There are a few other things as well. I think sequence signal, it's generally recommended to leave it at 0. You can look in the manual for more details about this. We can click here and we'll see what these numbers are referring to. Let me turn this off a second. In general, what the numbers will mean in most cases is, let me take something simple. For example, okay, let's just say the automation of the level and the pan. If I put a value of 9 here, or if it randomizes a value of 9, then we're going to have quite extreme pan and level automation. If we put a low value there, like 1, then we're going to have mild automation, right? So in general, most of these higher numbers are just going to mean more extreme processing. Lower numbers will mean more subtle processing. Not will mean that something is turned off in most cases. But there are a few things that are sort of weird things, like this number means that, this number means that. I found that very confusing, and again, you can refer to the manual for details about that. So what we do is, if we want to change these, we can just press these numbers here to put in new values. Now, you want to be careful with this, because if you go in and you change things using the sliders and you get things set up the way you want, if you then go in and start randomizing stuff in here, you're going to lose your, maybe painstakingly put in manual changes. So one important thing is this X thing. Like, let's say, for example, I went in and I manually set up something related to playback speed automation, and I really liked that. But let's say I do want to randomize something to get a change of what the app is doing, but I don't want to randomize this one. Then what I do is I just press X, and then the next time I press the randomize button, this will not be changed. So that's very important to be aware of. The asterisk will mean that it will definitely change its value when randomization is pressed, because of course, when we randomize any value, there's also a chance that the new random value could equal the old random value. We roll a dice, we get a 6. We roll it again, we could get another 6. But if we've pressed the star, then we're definitely not going to get a 6 on the next roll, right? Okay, so what was this set at? I've no idea. Let's put it to 1. Okay, so you can go through here, and again, this is something that, particularly at the beginning, when you're not very familiar with the app, you're mostly just going to go in and randomize. And then when you get more familiar with it, you might get more idea of, oh yeah, I want this one to be kind of more subtle, so let me just go in and give it a 2. No, I want this to be more extreme, let's go in and give it a 9. All right, so that's how we can use this templates thing. Input. So here, for example, we can solo or mute inputs. And remember, that's all going to depend on what we've selected here. So at the moment here, we're seeing different things like the level and the low cut and high cut filter, automatic gain control, file direct. This will allow you to hear the direct input signal of any files that are loaded here. If you're not using files, like if you're using channel input like I'm doing here, then that will not have any effect. Here, gain and frequency. I'll let you go in and explore these. There are like 44 different pages in this app. I cannot demo everything. It would be crazy. So, this is just for bus 1. This is for bus 2. If I press solo here, it's going to solo the input for bus 2. But what will that really mean? Maybe not a lot. You might not hear that because there's going to be a delay. We're not hearing the input here, we're hearing the output. So this is where it can become very hard to pay attention to what's going on in this app, because you've got all these different stages and they're all happening at different times. Another little criticism here, I mean, that's not a criticism because that's just the way the app works. But one thing is, the solo is exclusive. So let's say I solo 2, and then let's say I also want to solo 3, then you might think that you can click on 3 and press solo here, and then they'll both be soloed, but no, the solo button is exclusive, so that is now muted. So one thing I found is that it can be quite hard to pay attention to what is being soloed and what is being muted and stuff at any given time. I don't really like this aspect of the interface. I find it confusing. But if we go back to the main screen, over here, this also shows us some stuff related to soloing and muting. I'll let you look at the manual for more details about that. So we do have visual representation of what is being soloed or muted here, but the problem is, you see, that when we're in the input screen, we're not actually seeing that. Like to me, for example, one way that this interface could be improved is this little box should also be showing on these other tabs. But it can't, you see, because there's sliders here. So the solo and muting, it's really confusing at times. I find it very hard to keep track of what has been soloed, what has been muted. Don't know, it might just be the way my brain works is different to Igor's. Anyway, so that's the input section. Now, the trigger section is quite an important one. Basically, the sensitivity slider is important. So again, this is just related to bus 1, right? There's every bus has its own page for most of these different things. So when you this is something that really takes a lot of wrapping your head around when you first start to get into this app. So what does this sensitivity slider mean? If I put this up here, it has this value -50. What the hell does -50 mean? Basically, that means that any input that is at a level over -50 decibels can trigger recording, so it could be recorded into one of these squares in the matrix. If we put a sensitivity value down here, for example, then there's much less chance of signal being recorded because only signal over -5.91 decibels can be recorded. So in effect, what this means is that in all of these different pages for triggers, if we set up all the sensitivity sliders to be values, if we set them all up so that this pointer is down here somewhere, then the sound that the app puts out is going to be a lot more sparse, because only very loud sounds will get recorded, right? If we have all our sliders down here, then it's going to get very busy, because almost all signal coming in is going to be over, minus 45 decibels. So then we're going to have a lot more going on. So these are important, but, the randomization tends to randomize these in fairly intelligent ways, it seems. So, you don't necessarily need to go in and play around with these things. You can do it using randomization. Okay. Let's just check nothing's soloed. No. Okay, good. So control. Here we can change the frequency of the input signal. So we can make it higher or lower and so on. We can do bit masking, which is a kind of a glitching type effect. The shift is something related to bit masking. And step and repeat and skip, these are basically parameters that will affect how often a square here will be consecutively recorded into, or when it's not recording, how long the gap is going to be before it starts recording again. These things are quite technical. Okay, so this is basically the control panel. Now let me point out auto. If we click on any of these auto things, we're going to open up another window. And I mean, this window is just for this particular slider. This one is for that slider. We close them down here. So what these are is LFOs that will control the automation of the slider. And we can control the waveform type for the LFO. And we can control things like the rate and the phase and amounts of randomization and so on. So then we can set an automation amount here. So you can see just now this slider, the automation was off. This shows the real value of the slider, right? So if I put this on, now we're starting to get some changes, and the speed that that's moving at is going to depend on the speed that's set up in here. If I want that to move faster, then I would play around with this rate. So yeah, that's automation. Processing. So the processing is quite an important one. Let's take a look at this. Let me let you hear this. So let me bring in the signal again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to solo one of these things. So let's see. So here we're soloing 1. Let's solo 2. Let me turn this up. Let's solo 3. Now look here, by the way. This shows what effect is being applied to the signal. For example, here we've got overdrive being applied. Let's solo 5. Overdrive again. This one, this is the phaser. So you can see that, we're only going to be getting sounds from time to time, and those will depend on things like the trigger sensitivity for recording, the way the sequencer is set up, and so on and so on. Very complex. Okay, this is pretty cool. So this is with the flanger. So let's have a little go at experimenting with this. So first of all, let's look at this. This is going to filter this signal. So at the moment, it's the notch filter. And here we have the frequency and the bandwidth related to the filter type. Let's try bandpass. So that's quite thin and reedy. So one thing I could do is I could increase the bandwidth, right? Or I could play with the frequency. And then I could play with the intensity and the amount of the flanger, for example. You hear now how that's much more flangy. So this is one of the screens that I do really like to play with. I like to come in and play with the processing screen. That can be really cool. And we're going to get a lot of very different types of sounds depending on what filter types we choose. And again, you know, when you change your filter, you're really going to have to go in and look at the frequency. So there's a high pass filter. So if we bring this down here, it's going to allow a lot to come in. If we put it up here, we're going to be cutting most of it out. Low pass filter. So here, this is going to allow basically all the signal to come through, right? Let me put it back to bandpass. You see here that's very deep now. And up here it's going to be very high. Okay, now, so currently that's with the flange effect. Let's try phaser. This sounds a bit short. Ah, there we go. Let's try chorus. Let me just try, I'm gonna maybe, let's put on a low pass filter. Now here it says amplitude modulation. So that's tremolo. So this is a mistake. Here it says trem. This is actually not tremolo, this is vibrato. So this should say amplitude modulation, or it should say tremolo. And this one here should say vibrato. Or at least I think that was the way. There was definitely something that was wrong with these, I remember from the beta. Overdrive. Ring modulator. Decimator, bit crusher, bit reduction. You can see that these things will change, right? The sliders will change, like here, when we have this effect selected, this is the reduction amount. Here, this will be frequency, gain, frequency, frequency. And that's wrong because one of these should be amplitude. There's definitely some mix up in those. Chorus intensity, flanger intensity, phaser intensity. Okay, and then we come over to these sliders here, and here we have delay rate and the feedback amount. You can hear that, right? And you can see also how long it's taking this slider to adjust. That's controlled by something on the main screen. Over here we control the rate of the change. So if I put this up, for example, if I go back to this process tab, and if I play with this rate, you can see now it's going to take that slider much longer time. This is a really cool feature and a really important feature because this will allow morphing, and that can get really crazy. So this is really worth paying attention to, the way this slider is set up. if I bring this down here, it's going to be just a 1 beat delay for the change. So you can see there is still a little delay, always, but it's a very, very short delay here. So this is one of my favorite part of the apps, definitely. The processing tab, by far my favorite. And remember, at the moment, I've just soloed this 7. Now I unsolo. So by the way, one thing we can do is we can go in and mute. And that one is not exclusive, right? So like here, 1 and 2 are muted. If I go here, 3, mute, 4, mute, 5, mute, 6, mute, 7, 8. So you can see now everything is muted. So this is one thing that can be good to do. We can go in and we can just slowly unmute things. But let me mention one of my major criticisms of this app. First of all, I really wish that it had multi-out. If it had multi-out, we could just use sliders in AUM to play around with the levels. Or at least what I want is, I wanted to have one page, and I said this to Igor, and this is one of the reasons that I almost didn't review this app on release, because I feel so strongly that it needs this. I think that Igor will hopefully bring it in the first update. I really hope so, because honestly it needs it. What we need in this app is a simple mixer page where you have level and panning sliders and maybe something like effect amount or something for each of the buses, and you can just go in and very quickly adjust things, because otherwise it's hard to go in. There's just so many different pages in here for everything. I don't like this interface, I really don't. So now we're just listening to 8. Now we're listening to 8 and 7. Now 8, 7 and 6. But imagine how much cooler this would be if we just had one mixer page where we could go in and adjust the sliders for all of these. This is my main criticism of the app. Let me see the template page here. So if you want to just play around with things, you could practice changing values of these. One thing I would like is if you could drag down or up to adjust these values, but you can't. So very much just trial and error. Again, let's see what it comes up with now when I press the random button. Now, let me turn off instant. I think that the way this works is, if instant is off, I think when I press random, it will depend on this main screen thing. I think so. So let's try and put that to a higher beat value. And let's press random. And I think that what's going to happen now is that there's going to be a kind of morphing, and it will take it a while for that randomness to occur. So that can be interesting. That sounds pretty cool. Let me just mention one thing that I think would be cool. If you're someone who's using a linear DAW, or in AUM, you could use 4Pockets multi-track recorder or something. You could just go in and you could mute. You could randomize something where you've got a lot of different inputs. You could mute, and you could just record the audio from these, and then you could go into a DAW and you could just, play around with the levels of those much more conveniently, fading things in and out in your own way. But if this did have multi-out, or if it had its own page with faders and stuff like that in it, it would be great. By the way, another thing, unless it has been added, I think I remember that the parameters were not exposed. Yes, the parameters are not exposed. I just don't understand this. Why are they not exposed? But Igor said he will expose them in the next update. Again, I said, why not just do it now and release later? I think parameters should always be exposed. So anyway, be aware that at the moment the parameters are not exposed. So then we have the out section, and here we can control the level, panning, and things like that. Let's listen. So let's solo something. So for example, here one is soloed. So let's play with the panning. It's taking some time to change. Do you hear now how it's slowly panning over towards the right? If I go back to the main screen and change this to a lower value, then we're going to get that panning much faster. Right? So this is another thing that's cool to play around with. And again, play around with the automation. Remembering that a lot of what's going on is going to do with how the LFO is set up in here. Nice. So here we have an EQ. Low, mid, high. Hang on. This is soloed, so... Is this making any difference? Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think the thing is, there's just not a lot of low in this. Let's see what this is set up notch. Let's change this to a low pass filter. So again, complex, because you've got all these different filters and things. Here's our level control. And again, all these things can be automated. Crazy amount of flexibility. Here is the reverb send with the pre-delay. So that gets sent out to the reverb. And here we have the main reverb page. With damping and so on and so on. So now we're getting massive reverb on that. By the way, this will bring in the raw input for that channel. Then we've got things here related to the way the sequencer works. Let me just show you one thing, for example, here that will explain this a little bit. So if we go to the main page, the sequencer tab, and we'll see that's purple. And watch here the behavior of these, right? 8, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that is forward. Let's change it to backwards. So now look at the way these cells are being sequenced. Remember, the sequencer is just deciding what cells that have been recorded will be played and when. If we go back in, we can choose pendulum. So what it's going to do now is it'll go to the end and then it'll come back. Now remember, by the way, I'm soloing here. So maybe I should go in and unsolo. Okay, let's change to random. So now it's just jumping about randomly. Here, by the way, is a link to the in-app manual. The manual is not that long, well, it's long enough, but it is extremely heavy going, I felt. I did not enjoy working through this manual. But you know, I know I've been critical about some things in this video, and these are all things that I've said to Igor. You know, I want to be very clear with everyone. My channel, I put a lot of work into these videos, and even though developers give me free codes, it's very important to me that this channel is about what my opinions are about the apps. And I think this is a brilliant app in some ways, but I think it is a bit overly complex. I think the manual could explain things a bit more clearly. I think the interface could be designed in a way that would be more intuitive. It's just so not an intuitive interface. But I do think that this app can make some amazing sounds. Sometimes when I play with it, I just think, wow, this is the best thing ever. And then other times when I'm playing with it, I'm just kind of like, wow. But you know, what I have found from my past experience, Igor's apps, you really, really, really do need to give them time. Like when I first got when I first got Classic FX, I made an effort to learn it, and I kind of understood how to learn it. Like I didn't make a video at the time. I made a video, I think, a few months after it came out. But I hadn't used it a lot at that time. But you know what? I realized later that I hadn't really understood it that well when I made my first video. Then when I made my second video on Classic FX, I really understood it much better. And I think, to be honest, I understood it a lot better than most people on the Audiobus forum, because I've seen people talking about that app in the Audiobus forum, and they think that it's boring. It's very vanilla, and it's not. It can seem to be, but if you actually go in deep and you learn how to use it properly, you realize it is so not boring. It is very, very far from a boring app. It can be extremely radical. But it takes time. You've got to really, really, really delve into it and understand it properly and explore it. So Igor's apps are something that, you know, if you're not the kind of person that enjoys experimenting, if you're not the kind of person that is prepared to put a bit of time in, well, they're just not for you. So I would defend Igor in that sense. He's trying to do something really different. He's doing something very, very original, extremely original. But I would criticize him also because I genuinely think that these interfaces are not that fun to interact with, and they're like, it looks cool and everything, the matrix here, but overall, this interface is not that fun to interact with, and I feel it is overly complex. Nevertheless, I think he's one of the most interesting developers that we have, and I am certainly going to be playing with this app more, and I'm sure that a month from now, I'll understand it a lot better than I do currently, even though I've already put quite a lot of effort into understanding it. Let me finish off with just letting you hear a few more examples of this in action. And everyone, let me ask you, if you haven't done it yet, please do give this a thumbs up. I'm telling you, serious amount of work, and particularly in an app like this. This thing has absolutely fried my brain. It was an incredible intellectual effort to even get to the, relatively limited level of understanding that I currently have of it. So if this has been in any way useful for you, doesn't matter whether you like the app or not. That's not what the thumbs up is about. The thumbs up is you for thanking me for my work and telling YouTube that this is good content. So please do give it a thumbs up, everyone. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing, because I put out 1 or 2 videos a week, generally very deep. I think it's fair to say that in the realm of iOS YouTubers, there is no one putting out apps of the level of detail that I'm doing with the frequency that I'm doing. And definitely it is a valuable resource. So please, everyone, do, recognize that. And very, 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 very least you can do is give it a thumbs up. All right, let's listen to a few more examples. So, what to say in summary? What a crazy app. I just don't know what to say. I mean, it's funny. If you're one of the people who said that Classic FX was too boring, basically you're responsible for Igor bringing out this app, because what pretty much happened was, Igor had a reputation for doing crazy apps. Then he brought out Classic FX. A lot of people thought that was not really crazy enough. So then, a few months ago, I was speaking to Igor. He said, listen, I'm working on the craziest app ever. And certainly it is really crazy. I mean, it's really experimental. The main challenge to me is at the moment how to kind of rein it in a little bit. Like, it's really easy to make crazy stuff and interesting stuff, but unless you're going to kind of export the stems into a DAW or something, it's kind of hard to see how you would build up something that has a lot of interesting dynamics. As I showed, you can mute everything and then bring things back in, but it's not ideal. So I really want to see a mixer page. I really want to see multi-out, for example, would be good, but even if it doesn't have multi-out, just an in-app mixer page would be great. As I said earlier, what I'd like to see at a minimum there would be a level slider for each input, and maybe something like a slider to control the dry wet for the effect that is going on, and maybe panning, for example. I just feel there are just so many different pages in the app because remember, there are 8 input pages, there are 8 trigger pages, 8 control pages, 8 processing pages, 8 out pages. Okay, then there's just one for sequencer, one for reverb. There's one template page. And then the main page, it's pretty hard to get your head around. I mean, I'm finally starting to kind of understand a little bit what's going on here, but it's still going to take me more time. So it's a bit of a head scratcher of an app. If you're the sort of person who likes cryptic crosswords, you're going to like this. If you're the kind of person who likes to go in and immediately know how to use an app without reading a manual or without doing a lot of serious experimentation, then it's not really going to be for you. I also want to see the parameters being exposed. To me, it is not acceptable that an app comes out anymore without exposed parameters. I know Igor has said he's going to expose them in the next update. To me, why wait? This is something that should always be exposed, especially for experimental apps like this. The kind of people who like these kind of apps are the kind of people who really want exposed parameters. What else? I mean, it could do with MIDI learn, for example, as well. That would be nice. And just in general, I would just like something different with the interface. It's just too many pages of just similar looking sliders. It's easy to get confused, as I said, what you've done with solo and mute and stuff like that. I mentioned earlier in the video that I'd quite like this little screen, which shows the muting and soloing of inputs and triggers and so on, to maybe appear on other pages where there are mute and solo controls, so we could have a bit of just an easier visual feedback about what's been muted and soloed. I think if this gets a mixer page and you can go in and dynamically adjust just on one page some of the key controls, I think this will be a very interesting app. It already is an interesting app, but it's hard to play dynamically. So to me, it seriously needs an a mixer page. That is why I almost didn't make this video, but I feel that it's definitely interesting. It's got potential, and I knew that if I didn't put this video out, people would be quite lost. As I say, I struggled for days, really, to get even the limited understanding of this app that I currently have. I understand it like 90%, but I feel that in the 10% that is missing, that 10% is actually worth kind of more than 10%. I don't know if you know what I mean. I'm kind of talking about the 80-20 rule. I don't know, I feel like a lot of the fine details of how to use this in a more creative and more controlled way are currently eluding me. So it's definitely something that I'm going to be experimenting with more. It's certainly one of the weirdest app releases of 2020, that is for sure. So Igor is once again truly on the throne as the king of weird stuff on iOS. He's definitely telling people, you want weird, I can do weird. So yeah, we do want weird, but I would really like to see, Igor, a rethink of how you do your interfaces. Make something just a bit more accessible and a bit more intuitive, because these apps are just so the opposite of intuitive. There's a lot of power in there, but it's not easy to control. It's a bit of a wild stallion, basically, of an app. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Please do give this a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video. And don't forget that if you're watching this on the day it comes out, my video for frames will still be in the period where there's a chance to win apps, and that was a pretty amazing giveaway. Just for people who are not aware, my frames video, Imaginando are offering 5 of any of their apps for iOS or desktop. So if you're watching this right at the moment of release, get in quickly on that frames video and try and get winning. But again, remember that you can also win 5 of any of Igor's apps with this video. Follow the instructions in the pinned comment. Alright everyone, see you around. Thanks for watching. Take care.